So I'm not going to talk too much. I hope that won't disappoint you. But of course, a lot of what I have to say anyway is on our website, is in the course material. I'm sure you've read it, because that's what's brought you here in the first place, a sense that this might be a program of interest to you. So I'll go over it super quickly. But what I most want to do is actually leave time for questions and answers, because that's something our website can't yet do. Although that may soon change with AI. And also, very importantly, at 6 o'clock or maybe a little bit sooner, we'll have drinks and nibbles outside. And in the room, very kindly, are several members of our current student cohort that you can then approach the questions. And I think that's really going to be the most valuable for you, getting a sense of what this program is all about and what it offers students straight from the horse's mouth. So I want to leave you the opportunity to make really the most of that opportunity. But there will be a Q&A with us here as well when I'm done talking. So what is the MST in International Studies? Well, it's a part-time degree. It is a master's degree in International Studies and Politics, but it's unusual in that you take it over 2 years on a part-time basis. So it's designed for people with a professional job that they will carry on and wish to carry on alongside their studies. Part-time does not mean Cambridge Light. Unlike many of these part-time courses that allow you to work and study at the same time, this is not a program where you walk away with a diploma in international relations. This is a program from which you walk away with a Cambridge master's degree that is just as valuable, that is really the same as our full-time master's degree. And that also means that in order to earn that degree, you're going to have to do the same work, follow essentially the same curriculum as you would on our full-time master's degree in international relations and politics, just spread over 2 years so that you can carry on with your professional lives while also studying. I'll say a little bit about the practical structure of the course. It's, as I've said a number of times already, it's done over 2 years. The bulk of the teaching, or actually all the teaching, is done in the first year. So teaching takes place in quite intensive. You'll ask the current students here on the course just how intense it is, but it's pretty intense. It takes place in 2-week residential periods. In the first year, we have 4 of those residentials where you will come to Cambridge. You will be taught in person in a classroom, very specifically this classroom. Actually, this is where most of the sausage is made, in the sense that this is where we teach. And so it's not an online degree, and that I think is also what distinguishes this program from many part-time postgraduate courses, is that we think there's a lot of value in getting people into the actual classroom, not because good teaching can't be done online, but in part because the nature of this course means that students also get an awful lot out of interacting with each other, networking with each other. If I can use that word, many people who come on to the course have interesting careers, have a lot of expertise in various aspects of international relations, and get an awful lot out of exchanging that. And that tends to, enjoying exchanging their knowledge and experiences from their professional lives. And that tends to not happen so much online. The second year, then, you will be writing a dissertation. This, again, is something I think is fairly unique to this course. It's quite research focused. So the first year is where we try to give you all the tools and give you a sense of the major themes of international relations, the ways that academics think about it. We introduce you to a number of different fields or subfields that I will summarize in a minute. But the idea is then for you to take that and apply it in a major piece of research in your second year. So you will be writing a 20,000-word dissertation that will be done in collaboration or under the supervision of an expert in the field of your chosen topic. So you will have one-on-one supervisions. There will also be 2 residentials in that second year where you come to Cambridge. There's one going on right now, which is why we're lucky enough to have some of the current students of the cohort in the room, where you will present your ideas for research, your research questions, your methodology, your cases to the cohort, to members of the department, and get feedback on that. So that happens twice in the second year. I think that's enough about the structure. About our department that's running this degree, we're an interdisciplinary department. We have, as I already sort of said, we have some historians, we have international lawyers, we have people who specialize in economics, we have people who take a more sociological or even anthropological approach to the study of politics. We have a number of affiliated centers. So it's a broad department, and that's reflected also in the curriculum that we offer and the choice of course modules that we offer on the MST. So typically it will be courses in international theory of international relations, politics, history, law, security, and then various options that differ from cohort to cohort. Sometimes environment, sometimes gender, sometimes something regional specific, perhaps on China, some other region of the world. But there is quite a lot of choice on the menu. What else do I have to say? Who is the course designed for? Well, I said the course is designed for professionals, and I imagine that most of you here are here because you want to study part-time, because you already have a job of some nature. So professionals from, for example, industry or business, government, civil service, international organizations, higher education, NGOs. We get quite a few people from the armed forces. Really a very wide variety of people from different walks of life. We do also get students who are fresh out of their first degree, but don't want to do their postgraduate work on a full-time basis because maybe they would like to leave themselves the opportunity of seeking a job alongside. But I would say that the typical student will have spent at least some years outside an educational setting, right? So again, we do have some students that come straight. Most of them have been out and are coming back to an educational setting after a number of years of first and foremost seeing themselves as professionals in some career. And that can sometimes also cause unique challenges, mostly for people who are used to sort of a very different schedule and maybe haven't written an essay for quite a number of years. So we try to cater and support that as well. I know that you will want to hear something about how to apply and what we're looking for in successful students. But there's one thing I want to say to you first, before we get to the application stage, is I want to invite everyone in the room to consider really carefully. This program is wonderful. I hope that current students will tell you as much. But I want you to really consider very carefully whether this is for you. In the following sense, it's extremely important if you apply to this program that you're clear-headed about the time investment and the effort and the dedication that is needed to make it work, to study and to dedicate yourself enough to learning and research to gain a master's degree alongside, in many cases, a full-time job. Attendance to the residentials is absolutely essential. It is mandatory. We insist on it. We're not going to give you a degree if you show up for half the teaching. But it is also essential to actually completing this course successfully and learning that degree. And most people at the beginning think, well, that's not going to be very difficult for me. But invariably, unless you've really planned ahead for those 2 years, engaged with your employers. We do ask all employers to submit a letter saying we are okay to let this person go and attend these residentials. But things happen. people's lives are busy, and sometimes people find that it's a lot harder to carve out the time for this degree than they initially thought. And then that lands everyone in an unhappy situation. So do consider it really carefully. Do speak to our current students about just how many hours they have to dedicate to studying and preparing, and know that it's not just those 4 times 1 or 2 weeks that you'll be in Cambridge that that learning and studying for this degree goes on. It's also on your own time at home every week, sometimes in the weekends if you have very full-time jobs. And so it is a major commitment, and it's a commitment that will last 2 years. Great. So once you have decided that that's just the challenge you're looking for, how do you then apply? Well, again, you can go on our website and read all the entry requirements. We ask for a GPA, a grade point average, that is equivalent to a good upper second in the UK system. What exactly does that mean? I think it means a 3.7 or something in the American system, and so on and so forth. However, and this is a question that I'm sure we're going to get, is can the experience that you have acquired through your professional lives to some extent make up for either a lack of all the necessary usual education qualifications, or maybe slightly stellar results than we're asking for? And the answer is yes, it sometimes can. We do try to take a holistic view of every applicant. We do try to consider what people have to offer by virtue of having worked in a professional capacity, sometimes for decades. We also try to consider, if we're talking about someone who's been away for a long time, the simple fact of grade inflation and getting a 3.7 GPA 20 years ago is not actually quite the same as trying to get it today, and so on. So we do try to really consider each application on its merits. So if you do feel like you're not quite sure whether you would actually qualify for this, again, do come speak to us individually, and we'll try to talk you through that. So what do you need to apply? Well, you need obviously to give us some indication of what you have been doing before by way of amassing educational qualifications, your first degree. You need to submit a proposal. That proposal is an indication of what you think you'd like to be doing for your dissertation. So we expect you to identify a topic that you'd be interested in doing research on. Maybe even come up with, in a very rudimentary early sense, an idea of a research question. Now, this may sound a ludicrous thing to ask you before you even embark on the program. And so by all means, we do not expect you to have a fully fledged dissertation proposal with an elaborate scholarly apparatus or anything like that. Quite often students apply to this program because they don't actually have much of a notion of what international politics means. So, and they might be converting or wanting to convert from entirely different field. So it's really more about us getting a sense of where your interest lies, what it is that draws you to this program, why you're intellectually or professionally curious about learning more about international politics. And so asking you to identify an interesting question, even if it doesn't end up being the one that you actually write the dissertation on, is a really good indication to us of what makes you tick and whether it actually is meaningful for you to be wanting to come onto this program. We also ask you for a personal statement. Again, that's sort of, again, a question of what leads you to apply, what are you hoping to gain from this, but a little bit more about how you want this program to work for you in your life in general. Is it about maybe thinking about a career change? Is it about opening up new aspects of what you're already doing, but you want a different angle on it? Are you just kind of collecting master's degrees because you can afford to? Whatever it is, again, we want to learn more about you, the applicant, and why you're interested in this. Finally, for those who don't have English as a first language, and typically that's quite a large proportion of people on the course, because it is a wonderfully international course, and our students come from literally all over the world. Some of them travel a long way to get here. for the residentials, sometimes flying from places like Australia. That's a real big commitment, but that's how it works out. If English is not your first language, then you may or may not need to give us some proof of proficiency of English as well. But that's a sort of boring detail that the admin powers that be will deal with. And finally, you need 2 academic references. Yes, I think that's right. And there too, some students will say, well, gosh, you know, I haven't been on the school bench for a good 20 years. Doesn't look, just scanning the room, like that's would be the case for most of you, but or last time I were, you know, I left on not terribly good terms with my professor. Frankly, never going to want to write for me. What do I do? We can consider different kinds of letters from non-academics if that is very difficult for you to come by. But of course, ideally, we would be looking for academic references if that's at all feasible, because what trying to get a sense of is your suitability for working in an academic setting. So that's it. Your transcripts, personal statements, and the research proposal, and then finally, and importantly, a letter of support from your current employer, promising us that they won't try to prevent you from coming to Cambridge when the time comes, but actually are fully informed and supportive of your decision to undertake this degree, because otherwise you will end up being pulled in 2 directions, and that's not going to lead to a very happy outcome. So that's it, really, I think, in a nutshell. So, Richard, Carolina, Brendan, do you have anything to add?
Shall we throw it open to questions? Because the chances are they'll ask if I think of something.
If you think of something, someone will ask it instead. So yes, please don't be shy. Any questions? Yes.
So I was cautioned, my name is Alexandra, I'm here from the United States, from Washington, DC. I was cautioned that predictive analysis in a proposal might not be the way to go, and that it's better to do more forensic analysis in your research proposal and in your dissertation in general. Is there a sense on either direction from anybody up there?
So, I'll have to get my head around that. So you mean that?
She basically, my former professor for my master's, she said they're not going to like predictive analysis because there's not enough peer-reviewed sources writing about, for example, Ukrainian industry, and can it bounce back? Well, it's too early to say because it would require a crystal ball.
Okay, I think I get where you're getting at. So I think, well, as a general rule, I think as political scientists, international relations specialists, we try to stay away from trying to predict the future. We try to engage in analysis and explanation, and from that and on that basis, people, the reader, might forward project into the likelihood of this or that given, but the world is always a very complex place. So yeah, if you wrote me a proposal that said, you know, I'm going to write a dissertation that will show that 5 years from now, you know, Russia will have won or whatever, then I would probably say, can you please revise that and just tell me that you are going to analyze and look closely into, you know, the parameters that may be determining or may be important to military success in this particular conflict or any conflict or whatever. But again, I wouldn't, well, I'm not going to tell you that it's not important for you to think carefully about your research proposal, because it very much is, and we are very much looking carefully at that. But I think there would also always be scope for us to say, when you come here and we appoint a supervisor, you know, in general, what you wrote was all really interesting, but now let's try to work with that and modify it, and here's a better way of doing it. So they're not sort of particular things that I think on the admission side, we would go, oh, you know, you use the word prediction, so you're out.
Okay, that's all.
Mette, Greg has raised his hand, so I'm assuming that's a follow-up question on what's just been asked. If we...
Good morning from San Francisco. Good afternoon.
Sorry, Greg, we can't hear you.
You're Greg.
You can't hear me?
Let's just check the speaker. 1 second. Sorry, apologies.
I think it's working on my side.
Oh.
Yeah, it's going through the owl. Let's do that. Greg, would you like to try again?
Yes, can you hear me?
No, it's not
Richard,
working.
the volume both left and right might be low.
Oh.
Further down and on the right.
It's down, yeah.
Yeah, next to that one.
Oh, I do apologise.
Do apologise. We'd like to try that again. Sorry about this.
Shall I try again? Does that work? All right. Okay. Well, good morning from San Francisco. Good afternoon in Cambridge. I think there's some good questions in the chat that I'm interested in, particularly the commitment outside of attendance. I'm also interested how year 2 differs from year 1. Year 1, I understand we've got modules. Obviously, you'll be studying the modules. You'll come in. Year 2 obviously is dissertation focused. So, are you basically researching on your own, working with your expert, and doing less classes?
Yeah, good question. And by the way, if I could see a list somehow easily of whatever is in the chat, I'll get to the time commitment in a minute and answer the question in reverse order about the structure. So yes, year 1, you're taking classes, modules, and you are doing exams. So not every module that you take will be examined, but there will be exams during every residential in that first year. In the second year, no, you're not just working by yourself with your supervisor. So we have 2 residentials where you are working in a sense more collaboratively as a cohort, presenting your research to each other, which I think is a really important part of it actually, but where you're also getting a lot of additional teaching specifically on methods and modes of inquiry and how to structure your dissertation. So tomorrow, the students that are here will be hearing about how to conduct interviews, different strategies and modes of interview analysis. Earlier on this week, they have done case studies and other research, discourse analysis, whatever. So that second year is also partly taught, but much more focused on giving you the tools to complete your dissertation research.
Great, thank you.
Yes, Rick
Mette,
wants to say something.
I may chime in to address the time commitment that
Yeah,
Greg
oh,
asked
please,
about.
yes.
So, hi, Greg. I'm one of the present cohorts, still alive and kicking. So I guess a couple things about your time commitment question. It's a good question and one you really need to consider. And I would say that although it is a part-time degree, it requires full-time dedication with a capital F. And I would say that that commitment's different depending whether it's been 3 years since your last degree or 33 years, and how quickly you read, but it is intense, it's fair, but it's intense. So, setting aside one evening a week or one day on the weekend, honestly, is not what this is about.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I mean, to give you a sense, when students are here for the residentials, they will be sitting 7 hours of lectures a day. It won't all be, professors talking at them. There will always also be seminars. There's lots of interaction, but it's probably on average 7 hours of classroom interaction. That's simply how we have to do it. Otherwise, we'd have to pull you out of your daily lives for additional weeks, and that just wouldn't work. So the residentials are super intense. That also means that you don't do the readings for those classes at night when you sort of stagger back to your college room. And I forgot to say that, by the way, when you are in Cambridge, you will be living in the Cambridge colleges. You will be sort of a part. You will be matriculated. You will be a part of Cambridge University like any other Cambridge student. When you're here, you will be part of a college. And so you will get to sort of enjoy that full Cambridge experience to the extent that you find it enjoyable, which I hope you will, it'll be very like full-time students here, except a little bit less crowded because the part-time students tend to come the week before full-time starts, and so there will be fewer undergraduates around to get in your way in the queue to the meals and all the rest of it. But otherwise it's that experience. So yeah, once you're here, it's too late to prepare for being here, right? It's too late to do those readings. All that preparation has to happen in the evenings, on the weekends, or if you're lucky enough to have a part-time job that gives you some free time more consistently to do it. And then I think it's probably fair to say that once you have then done the residential, you'll go back and think, oh, now I get it. So that's what that, book or reading or whatever, this is what I was meant to take away. And hopefully I'm looking very intently at the current students. Hopefully that will sometimes lead people to go, I should probably read a little bit more about that. Or, I should call up some of the other students and have a chat about it. So it's ongoing, and it is definitely not just a commitment in terms of time, just a commitment to the actual residentials. That would not end well. Any other questions?
Shall we
on
revert to the
chat?
room? Or,
Oh,
we've got a question in the room.
Oh,
If
yes,
Mette would
sorry.
like to-
Could you delve a little further into how the residential teaching sections look? And from what I understand, there's 6 blocks, teaching blocks. And we have to take 6 modules for assessment. Do we essentially do each block one different module? And go very deep into it, or is it broken apart? We do multiple ones, and also in terms of assessment, do you do a certain amount of modules in one block and then it's due in the next block, or are they all due at the end of the first year?
super good question. So 6 residentials are over the 2 years. So in the first year, there are 4. The very first one, you will take what we call the core course, and that will have 3 sub-modules, one in international relations theory, one in security, and one in international organizations. And you will then, in the following residential, start by being examined in that one. The next 3 residentials of that year, you will be taking modules that are, more thematic. So there can be one on the history of, I forget actually what we have there, but they will be thematic. And they will also be examined, but not all of them. So you will elect to take in each residential 2 modules. You will be invited to sit in on other modules. We try to schedule them so that they don't all overlap time-wise, because once you're here, you might well want to make the most out of just listening to professors. But you will be taking 2 modules, one that you will indicate that you wish to be examined in, and another that you take simply for credits. So we will put it eventually on your certificate that you took this, but you won't actually have to be examined in it. And we will leave it up to you to decide which one you want to be examined in and which one you want to just take for credit, as it were, until the end of that residential. Again, the exam will come at a later point. The exam of the core course will be invigilated, that's the word. So you will take it physically, sitting in a room and writing, most likely handwriting. I'm not entirely sure. We may be able to offer you the opportunity of typing, but that will be an exam taken under good old-fashioned time pressure in the room. The other exams for the modules will be take home. So you will get the questions, and then you will have a much longer period to write a slightly longer essay and hand it in by a given deadline. So that's that part of it. And then in the second year, as I said, you have the two residentials that are focused much more on the dissertation. So there's no examination aspects to those.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a follow up from that. What does it look like in between the section? What the teaching? Like you mentioned, it's not an online program. Also, is there any how do you talk about the teaching?
Yeah, so there's no teaching in between the residentials. You will, from day one, you will be allocated a supervisor. And although your relationship with your supervisor, who's meant to be helping you to devise, plan and execute your dissertation, will mostly kick in the second year. They will also be able to support you to some extent during the first year. As will the general academic team. But the idea is sort of, well, if you are struggling and there is something you would like input on, you get in touch. But it's self-study in between the residentials, first and foremost.
Understood. Okay, it makes sense now what you said earlier about reading before the residential. But
Yes, but
If I may,
Please, Canvas.
I'm also on the current course, and it's fair to say that we do the residentials and the teaching all takes place within the 2 weeks,
Yeah.
or in the second year's case, in the 1 week. In the 2 weeks, you sit in on the modules, you then decide which module you want to do the assessment on, and then you have, I think it's still 6 weeks, or there.
Roughly 6
Two-handed,
weeks.
yeah.
Exactly, to do an essay. So actually, to the question about what happens in between, you'll be spending a lot of that 6 weeks doing reading,
yeah.
doing writing,
Yes.
and submitting the essay, and then you'll have a few more weeks before the next residential to get ahead of whatever the course
The
is that
reading.
you'd like to
Good,
focus on.
thank you so much for clarifying that. Yes, that's right. You will be effectively working on assessments, but also catching up on readings and preparing for the next residential's readings. Hence the idea that this is pretty much fairly ongoing. Yeah.
I'd like to describe it as a full-time course taught on a part-time basis, because the amount of work that you have to put in, as has been reflected by the students, it really is full on.
So what is our full-time MPhil? A full-time course on a
A full-time course is in a much shorter period of time.
There are some written questions, I think, Richard. Would you mind reading them to me? Because otherwise I'm going to be
Okay,
doing it.
so, yeah, on my glasses as well.
Mm.
So thanking us for the presentation. Understand the dissertation work will be individually supervised by an academic specialist.
Yes.
Are the academic specialists only professors, university teaching officers, fixed-term lecturers, or do they also include affiliated lecturers, teaching associates, fellows of the policy department? They're asking, they would like to understand
Yes.
whom they're eligible supervisors.
That is a good question. So in 99% of the cases, I would say they are professors or UTOs, university teaching officers, so full-time staff in this department. Sometimes a student comes in with a kind of unique dissertation idea for which there would be someone elsewhere in the university that is really the specialist, and we will then reach out to arrange a supervisory arrangement that doesn't involve a core member of this department. But as a general rule, yes, it will be professors or lecturers in polis. Actually, we find that that's really important. There are quite a number of these degrees across this university where a lot of the teaching is sort of farmed out, and that can result in various inconsistencies. So if you do end up with a supervisor that is a part of the core team, then we will also make sure that you have a kind of associate advisor in the department that can help you navigate the specifics of this department that somebody who isn't here full time wouldn't be quite as familiar with. It would never, obviously needless to say, supervision would never be supplied by anyone who is not a Cambridge employee or staff. So we're not kind of farming you out to people in other universities. That would sort of defy the point of offering you a Cambridge degree.
Shall I move on? Okay, so someone's mentioned it would be great if we can repeat the questions asked in the room. So for the
Yes.
benefit of those online, I'm guessing the microphones aren't as we think they are.
And will it be taped?
It will be taped.
Yeah, okay, I think that's better instead of treating everyone here to
How many questions
repeat.
are studied outside of residentials? I think that's probably been addressed.
Yeah.
If an applicant takes a break from employment to complete the program as part of a career transition, do we still need an employer support letter? Or can we just write to explain? I would assume they can write and explain, but if they then go on to employment, I personally would find it beneficial if you can then give us an employer support letter.
Yeah.
So that we can make sure you are looked after.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, some people are self-employed, and obviously we're not going to ask you for a letter from yourself promising solemnly that you will do this. But But if you do take up employment, or as sometimes happen, if your employer changes midway, then we would like to see that your new employer is equally on board with you doing this. If they're not, and if you decide that this career move is extremely important to you, then the option would be to intermit in order to return to full-time employment and then come back and finish the course when you once again are ready to actually commit to spending a good chunk of your time on this.
Okay. For those who may already have completed a master's degree, show offs, from a reputable university, is there a possibility to count? I assume they mean to account the degree they already have towards some of these credits, and I believe the answer would be a hard no.
Yeah, that's a hard no.
Okay. So, if the IELTS test score is lower than the requirement, is there another exemption case? For example, if a student used to finish a master's degree where English is language of instruction in previous school, the admissions team may refer you to the language centre within the university. To the level of academic English does have to be enough that you can understand the reading, understand the lectures, and write a good quality piece of work.
So the university is constantly, as I imagine are most universities, certainly most UK universities, are constantly revising their approach to this. In part, it's because government is constantly changing rules for, who can be here, how long, and what has to go into visas and student visas and all that. But we are trying as best we can to be maximally flexible, not to the extent that we look the other way if people want to come onto the course and actually don't have the necessary language skills, but to the extent that we try to offer ways of fairly assessing people's proficiency in other ways than sometimes people live or work in regions where it's quite difficult to go and take a TOEFL or an IELTS or whatever they're called in time to actually submit it. And we then have the option of referring you to the language center. Sometimes people are sort of on the cusp and we might have some worries about whether you would struggle, in which case we can send you to the language center and you would get a support diagnostic. It's not a kind of you're in or you're out. It's rather saying, well, you're in, but here is our idea for a support package that we would recommend that you accept in order to bring you up to proficiency. Because one thing is speaking good English, and another is so I'm obviously not a native speaker. I was once an international student crossing borders. I thought my English was pretty good because I watched lots of lame American TV shows and they all make perfect sense to me. And once I was in a classroom doing graduate level work, it was absolutely exhausting, right? That was quite a different way to use a foreign language. And people aren't always sort of quite prepared for that. But we do have support structures in place to help with that as well.
Are there any exemplar proposals which we could view to get a sense of the level of detailed understanding needed? I don't know that we keep them.
Exemplary
Example.
of an application.
Yeah, examples from previous applications. I'm not sure.
No, I don't think so.
I think we're probably required to dispose of them.
I think those go straight for data security, whatever retention rules purposes. Those go straight in the shredder, I would imagine.
I don't know.
But I am pretty sure that some of our current and past students might be generous enough to share their experience. After all, they were all successful, so they can certainly tell you in broad strokes what did the trick for them. That might be useful.
So in other words, if you've got that as a question, maybe email us and we'll see if we can, there's the camera, put you in touch with someone who can help you. If an applicant has completed continuing studies courses after his or her degree programs, do you always also want those records with the transcripts? And would lecturers from continuing studies courses Cambridge be suitable for the recommendations?
Yes, absolutely they would. And basically, we would like to see any and all transcripts that you have that you think give us a sense of your level of preparedness for the course. But definitely a teacher in a continuing education course would be a very good person to write an academic reference, I would think.
Okay, so the next question we have is the research topic The research topic I'm interested in proposing for my dissertation related to the treatment of queer migrants in Turkey by law enforcement would likely require a period of fieldwork. Would this type of research be suited to the course?
Yes, absolutely. And luckily we have a very well-staffed and vibrant and exciting Center for Gender Studies associated with Polis. So there would be academic staff there that would be probably suitable to supervise you. And this brings up the question of fieldwork, which is a really important one. All our students, whether they're part-time or full-time, well, not all of them do field work, but for all of them, it is a consideration. And very often people do field work as part of their master's dissertations. To some extent, as part-time students doing this over 2 years, you're in an even better position to potentially do field work. I know you have jobs as well, and that might be difficult, but on the other hand, you're able to plan ahead. And for many people on the course, fieldwork comes sort of naturally because there are regions or areas of the world that you're already expert in, or where you have connections or professional experience that opens doors. So fieldwork is an important component of dissertation research for many students. The only thing to say about it really is that as a university, we exercise quite strict oversight over the ethical side of that. So you'll have to apply for ethics permission if you do for instance, if you travel abroad and want to do interviews with people or whatever your field work involves, and also a risk assessment. So if you want to go into a war zone, then we might have problems with that. But sometimes, of course, people on the course already are working in war zones, in which case we can't really tell you not to go. But the part of it that is strictly tied to your research, the university will want a thorough risk assessment, and you will need to apply for permission, for an ethics permission, if you are proposing, for instance, to interview anyone who could be a potentially vulnerable individual.
Okay, so the next question I think a lot of people will be interested in is, do we review the applications upon receipt, or are we waiting for a certain date to begin the review?
Yes, that is an excellent question. So what we are effectively going to do, there is a long period during which we're open for applications. We don't review them on receipt. We're not sort of eagerly waiting for that next application to drop into the inbox and then can't wait to read it. But at the same time, we also don't wait until the deadline and then read all of them at once. We do effectively give most of the offers towards the end, but we will have 2 stages where we admit. So we will give a portion of offers in what?
I think we were looking at, depending on how many applications we have by that point, we're likely to do an initial review at the end of December, start of January.
Yes.
With the aim of making perhaps as many as 20% of
the offers early on, and then the remainder. So a quarter of the application, let's say, early on. The reason we don't do half or many or do it on a rolling basis is that obviously we'd like to have a view of the gathered field. At the same time, some applications may come through that just look frankly very strong, and we appreciate that people need time to plan their families, their personal lives, their professional lives. So we will do an initial review midway, and then we'll probably do some further internal reviews, but with the understanding that the bulk of the offers are released at the end.
I'll just ask, in terms of interviews, how does that work? Are you expecting to interview everyone, and is there a particular, and will that take place at a particular time?
So again, every cohort is a little bit different, not in how we treat you, but in terms of how many applications we get, post-COVID, before COVID, whatever. So it's a little bit hard to know what we are looking at. And so it will depend on numbers, I think, when we do them, whether in order to manage our schedules, we need to spread it out a lot, or whether we can do them all in kind of a relatively compressed timeframe, but not everybody who applies will be interviewed. Everybody who we think is a good prospect for the course, we will also interview before giving you an offer. We will interview you to get a sense again of whether what you've written down makes sense. We will interview you in order to look you closely in the eyes and say, when you say you can commit to this course, are you really sure that's actually going to happen? And we will interview you also to give you one more opportunity to ask questions of us. By the time you've applied, you have formed hopefully a much clearer idea of why you want to do this, what you want to do your research on, and you're likely to have more specific questions for us. Who might I be working with? What sort of courses would be on offer that would particularly help prepare me for this research? So it's also an opportunity for us to have a forth and back and make sure that the match is exactly right.
So are you able to indicate around about when you think you'll try to run those interviews and then when you would anticipate making offers?
Yeah, so we will do some interviews, I imagine, in December. And then we will do them on a running basis
I would
in
assume that after
February.
the last
Yeah.
March would be as early as
Yeah.
March as we can manage,
Yeah.
depending on what's going on departmentally at the time, but as early as we can, because
Yeah.
obviously the sooner the offers go out, especially if there's a condition attached to the offer, which might take you some time to go away and get the document and upload it, and then the admissions team have to tell us that it's being uploaded. So we really do want to move as quickly as we can. Obviously, limitations may be in force at the time.
Yeah. So the one thing I would urge, because I know it's only natural that when you apply to a program, there's going to be some nervousness about getting in. You don't all know each other, I imagine, in a close personal capacity, but still word travels. And so please don't be terribly nervous if you hear about someone having been interviewed and why on earth haven't I been interviewed or something like that. There's only so many of us. We would like ideally to match interviews with sort of broad areas of expertise. So it might simply just be that the person who has been assigned to interview you is on field work or finishing a book or doing something else. So please don't read into that too much. You shouldn't expect really an interview and an offer until after the final deadline, and we will, as Richard said, do it as quickly as we humanly can for purposes of allowing us to plan, but mostly also because we know that for you it's a big deal to plan for something like this. Yes, please.
With the proposal, do we need to worry too much about trying to mold it around the departmental interest, or is it just to stand on its own merit, such and put work into that?
Yeah, it would be amiss not to show. I wouldn't say, go and closely read the profiles and research interests of every member and make sure that you make this very shoehorned to someone's particular, but at the same time, we would like a sense of why you want to come and do this degree in this department at Cambridge rather than, do something at Yale or Harvard or the LSE or whatever. So obviously, if there's no meaningful connection really to the types of things that people in this department are working at, and that can be in ever the broadest possible way, but if it really doesn't spell Cambridge, now, as I said, this is an interdisciplinary department. People work on a really, really broad set of topics and regions and issue areas across the world. So I wouldn't think it would be difficult, but it would be a good idea to sort of indicate, well, why this particular program, other than simply, well, it's 2 years and the residential period, it's sort of aligned really well when I was going to take vacation anyway, or something like that, something a bit more substantive. Of course, that would be a good idea.
And perhaps make sure it's seated within the general field of international relations as well. If you want to do pinball studies, not us. So I think I can probably answer this one. If a strong applicant's first college choice is not available for some reason, would a different college be offered?
Yes.
And the way it works is we deal with 6 colleges who offer us a fixed number of spaces that we can house students with. We ran that process earlier this year for the 25 cohort. So when that comes around, it is possible they'll be doing urgent refurbishment work. They won't have as many spaces available. So Yes, it is not, I mean, for example, I think King's next time, which is no doubt a very popular choice. I think they're offering us 5 places.
Mhm.
And so if everyone says, I want to go to King's, that is not going to happen.
Mhm.
And we'll try and work out a fair way of attributing those.
Mhm.
We will go through the other 5 colleges.
Yeah. Yeah, so you will be asked to indicate the first and second choice, and if some colleges are oversubscribed, we'll do it by lottery. That's
And
the only
another thing
reasonable
we're
way
very
to do
keen
it.
to do this year, a lesson we've learned, is we only placed 3 students with one of the colleges, and they felt very disadvantaged because they weren't able to go home and talk about what they just learned. They didn't feel that they were a significant presence in the college. They were getting from the college what they wanted. So we do want to make sure that we give a good number of students to all of the colleges as well. Are there any scholarship opportunities available and how can we apply, please? Unfortunately, no. It's a part-time course. It doesn't attract the funding and scholarship opportunities that other courses at Cambridge do. There is some guidance on the website for funding opportunities. Many of our students are self-funded, sponsored by their employer or potential employer or the military.
Yeah, or in some cases, there might be governmental funding in your home countries to help you pursue a degree abroad. So when we say there's no funding, it means there is sadly no university funding. It is something we hope will change. This is not really any meaningful reason for me to tell you this because you're thinking about applying now. So, you know, I could tell you, hold your breath for 5 or 10 years, come back and maybe there'll be funding for part-time students. I very much hope so. But that's probably not a helpful answer at the moment. No. But of course, to the extent that we can be helpful in helping you to land that external funding by sending letters of support to a funding body at home or in your country where you're from, or an employer or anyone else to explain why they'd be well advised to invest in letting you do this, then of course we'll be prepared to do that to try to help to secure the funding.
So if a student works out of Cambridge, so presumably still living here, will the same university resources that are accessible during the residential periods be available year round? Yes, and mostly yes, but the colleges may not be able to accommodate you as a live-in student outside of the times they've committed to us because they've got the undergraduates, PhD students, other courses.
So if by the same resources you mean a room to sleep in, then the answer is no, but everything else, library access, and everything else that goes with being a full member of this university, yes, you're full members of this university for the 2 years with all that entails.
Okay. So we have a question from an undergraduate, presumably recent, would like to apply for this part-time master's program. Are professionals prioritized in the admissions process? That's an interesting one.
That is an interesting one. I think I would just want a really good explanation for if you're not working, why would you want to do this part-time rather than full-time? So why aren't you applying to that other degree we also offer, which will allow you to do all this in 9 months? There might be good reasons for that. So I wouldn't say you'd be disadvantaged. You'd probably find yourself on the younger side in the cohort. But as I said, I think because people come from so many different places in the world and so many different walks of life, it actually is a case of us looking very closely at each individual application and trying to make sense of your journey, why you want to do this, at the extent to which you're ready for this right now, and it's the right solution. So we might well read your application and say, this all sounds really good. Why don't you do this full time? But it could also be that you could convince us that part time is right for you, even though you're just fresh out of your first degree.
Will an applicant be allowed to submit without the IELTS results and send the IELTS results if and when an offer is made? Theoretically, yes. It depends how close we are to the time when we consider we have to cut off reviewing applications and send out the offers. Conditional offers are made for a lot of things. The offers go out by the admissions team, which is not in fact us, but they're the ones who tick the boxes and check everything is as it should be. Then they send us what they believe is a reasonably complete application.
I would say, yes, of course, in principle, as Richard said, as long as we have all the pieces by the time we need to make a decision, and in some cases, we could even potentially make a conditional offer. I wouldn't advise it. I would advise you to be very clear-headed about just how long it takes to get different pieces of the puzzle in place. Language test centers tend to be incredibly burdensome. They can be very, very difficult. Sometimes, you have to book a month in advance. And if I can be honest, Cambridge is a very well-functioning place, but it is a very, very large university. It's a large bureaucracy. Things don't always move terribly quickly on this side either. We have term time, and then we have out of term time where things don't happen as quickly. So to the extent possible, try to get everything together as early as you can. Conditional offers are not nice for anyone because they leave everyone in limbo. And for those of you, again, who work, who may have, in some cases, families and so on, knowing very last minute whether you're on this course or not, it's likely not going to be necessarily very easy then to prepare adequately. You might have to pay an awful lot more for that flight to be at the first residential than if you had been a little bit more foresighted.
It's also worth considering if one of the things that you're trying to get a hold of, if you get an offer, is that something that will serve you in good stead if you don't get an offer here? Is that certificate useful to you applying for something else or a job or something like that? Because if it is, you might as well just go ahead and get it and save yourself that little piece of paper. Okay. I'm a little curious about the differences in the course content and outcomes between the MST and MPhil program, aside from the obvious full-time, part-time. I'm someone who has taken a career break to dedicate some time to get back to studying with an aim eventually to joining academia.
So the differences in offer, well, I mean, actually, they're very minimal because the courses that we offer you are the same as we offer our full-time students. Very literally the same, only for the full-time students, they're delivered over 7 weeks in 2-hour seminars. The same academic will deliver the same course with the same reading list to you over 3 days. So effectively, it's the same. Not every course that is under full-time MPhil may be offered in any given year to the part-time, and sometimes there will be things that are offered to the part-time before they then get offered to the full-time, because we do have a rollover of staff and interest and so on. But effectively, it's exactly the same. It's the same curriculum. It's taught by the same people. It's taught to the same level. Slightly more gradually. As I said, we have a core course here because we realize that loads of people are converting from adjacent fields. So we start you off a little bit more softly, trying to build up the basics and give you a sense of some of the major concepts and approaches in the field. But from then on, once we're into the modules, it's pretty much the same content as if you were a full-time student. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I suppose perhaps the only other follow-up would be the curriculum will be basically the same as an equivalent module taught on a full-time basis. But that's not to say that necessarily that module will be taught on both courses, which I think you did reference, but just
not in any given year. Sometimes a professor may have time to do this once in a year, not 2 times. Sometimes they'll prefer to. It depends, but essentially, yes.
Okay, just have the experience within the cohort.
Yes, go ahead.
So is there a difference between, it's hard to imagine anything better than MS, of course, but in terms.
I love you, Rick.
My brother. Having the experience, do you notice between MPhils, do they have less experience in the real world versus the MSTs and the value of that?
Yeah. Well, obviously, slightly different things happen on the 2 cohorts, right? It would be ridiculous to say that everything pans out exactly the same. So what is the same is broadly speaking, well, it's the experts that will teach you. We're all the same. It's the topics that we think it will be interesting to teach you. It's the reading list and so on. What happens in the classroom does tend to be different. Teaching to an MST audience, loads of people have very particular knowledge and experiences to feed in. It is also slightly different when you do pull people in from full-time jobs into these very intense residentials. Can I say fully honestly, my experience is that sometimes not everyone in the room has read everything on the reading list by the time they get here. Whereas the full-time students, I know that's offensive, and of course you should do, but the full-time students have breathing space between each set of lectures, so we'll be able to, everyone has looked over and visited the material, but they may not have read it forwards and backwards 3 times, at least not everyone in the room to the same extent that a full-time student will. And what often happens is, instead, I feel that people do a reading, then they come to the residential, then we really tuck into what that material means and what those readings mean. We try to put them in context, and then people will go away and over the next couple of months revisit that material and read it again. I doubt that the full-time students do it exactly the same way, so I think there's a sort of different workflow. But again, that has more to do with the sort of, well, both pedagogical engagement and also just the constraints or the affordances of people's time. But again, the basic content is the same, and the time that you will at some point need to devote to getting on top of that material will also be the same.
So we've got a question about military personnel in the cohort tonight. Unfortunately, none of them are here with us.
Right.
And the work-life balance essentially there. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, okay, it's got to do with that.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just going to say there's none here tonight, and wonder whether any of the students who are here might have any personal observations about some of the students in the military, and if they've shared anything with you, you might be willing to share with the group. No? No? Okay, apparently not, so we'll move on to you.
I mean, if I can just say really briefly, so there are in the current cohort, there was on the last one a number of military personnel. And I think the biggest challenge is that sometimes they will get on short notice stationed somewhere that they didn't expect. So there's unique challenges there. I imagine, and I'm just kind of imagining this, that if you're someone who's already stationed away from home for long periods of time, then negotiating with your family these residentials is even an additional burden. But I imagine if any of you have, if somebody is applying with that background and have specific questions around that, I'm sure that some of the current cohort would probably be willing to, well, I shouldn't speak out of turn. I would hope that one or more of the current cohort would be willing to answer that question bilaterally. Please.
Yeah, so my question was around outside contribution, whether, I mean, obviously we have professors. Do you bring in professionals, for example, the military example, or the military to speak on a subject matter?
Yeah, so we have loads of additional talks that aren't part of the taught modules, but that will be presentations from professionals, practitioners, political leaders, people, secretary generals of this or that or the other thing. So there's, and especially in the second year, again, the students sitting here have had an extra busy week because once we're done with all the dissertation workshops and methods and so on, there will then be talks and dinners and more talks. But hopefully most of them interesting. But precisely that. There is also, and I think that has actually evolved or developed, especially under this cohort, for which I have to thank them. Typically, it would be me and my fellow academics thinking, what would it be good to throw at them? And so I invite speakers and plan, but actually this cohort has also been quite proactive in saying, some of us have connections to this or that person. We happen to know that this really interesting person is coming through Cambridge or would be willing to come through Cambridge. Could we organize a talk? And so the students have put on their own events as well for the cohort, which has been really, really wonderful. And I think it's been, extremely positive, except for maybe eating even further into those few hours of rest and sleep.
Unfortunately, we couldn't put on everyone that was suggested. But there's nothing to say that the cohort can't, like the Police Society has been restarted by a student on this cohort at the moment. And so they have little get-togethers. That sounds very patronising, I don't know. But they arrange to get together and have a guest speaker come in. So there's nothing to say that the cohort can't go outside of the confines of the course and go, well, we all live in 14 different countries, but we can get together on Zoom at this time. And I know someone who everyone would love to hear from. There's nothing to say you can't do that outside of the residential, provided you still submit your essays on time and privately.
And my experience from many cohorts now of this is that, you know, every cohort is a bit different, but usually groups form, if not the entire cohort, although sometimes that, then at least groups form that stay very closely in contact in between the residentials and maybe meet together in study groups, discuss some of the readings and topics, but indeed also might discuss other things that have related relevance, or invite external speakers to be part of that group. Great. I wonder if people are starting, are there more questions in the chat, Richard?
There are, but I want to know, do we wish to continue? Do we want to release our students, some of whom have a cohort dinner to go to tonight? Or they've
Yes.
organised
So
themselves?
I wonder if we should, you know, there should be drinks
should
and
be
nibbles
refreshments
outside, so I will stay as long as I can before rushing to set dinner, and maybe this would be a good time to allow you to individually come, and especially to ask questions of our kind students before they run away and don their gowns and all that for dinner, because you can ask questions that they may get different answers to than I would.
I wonder
That's
whether
the whole idea.
maybe if we try, Carolina, do you think you'll be able to capture the questions in chat so that we would be able to perhaps post some answers?
Yes.
Is that something? Yeah.
Great.
That would
So
be
if
good.
there's anything there we haven't answered, we will do. Right.
Anything that's currently there, we're not going to leave the chat open until Christmas.
So please join us for great.
Thank you all for coming online.